So in a previous talk I was talking about the 5 aggregates of clinging, and how the 5 aggregates of clinging are basically the 5 layers of our body-mind experience that we have attachment to, and that causes a lot of suffering. So I want to speak more about the nature of consciousness. This consciousness is the most subtlest aspect of our mind. And consciousness is the knowing faculty of the mind. It's the part of the mind that's aware and experiences objects. Everything else, like the form, the sensations, the perceptions, and the reactions and emotions and so on, all these are objects of the consciousness. And normally we take this consciousness to be myself. There's a sense of I am conscious. There's a sense of I am the one that's hearing, seeing, tasting, smelling, touching, thinking, liking, disliking, and so on. So the consciousness is what we have the clinging to as myself. And oftentimes this consciousness might even be considered to be a person's soul. But in the Buddhist teaching, this consciousness, and especially the ego consciousness, is not something that's inherent in consciousness itself, and it's not something that's permanent or eternal, but it's created. So the sense of self is created within the mind because of attachment and clinging. And it's this sense of I that allows the mind to totally let go and transcend in order to experience the state of unity, or the state of oneness, or to experience that which lies beyond mind and matter. So it's very important in the Buddhist teaching to understand the nature of the ego consciousness and to be able to let go of it. Because the whole life is lived for this ego and to satisfy the desires of the ego. But basically the ego, the sense of I, is made up of desire. That there cannot be ego without desire, and no desire without the ego. They're like two sides of a coin. And so this is important to understand also in the process of the meditation and in developing wisdom, and to see how these two things are interacting with each other. Now, when a baby is born, a baby is not born with the sense of I. And the sense of I is only developed after about the 6th month of a baby's life. The sense of I starts developing. Because when the baby is born, then it's given a name. And the parents are holding it, and the relatives are coming over to pinch its cheek and hold it and calling it its name. And then giving it all kinds of attention. But in the beginning, the baby's consciousness is more oceanic. There's not even an idea that it's different than its mother or it's any particular person. But this gradually coagulates. A sense of I, or a nucleus in consciousness, begins to form. And because of the attention that it's being given and getting it as the name, it gradually gets this idea that, there's some permanent entity or person that is in this body and mind, and this consciousness belongs to. And in the Buddhist teaching, this clinging to the sense of self is the very deepest level of ignorance, and also the very deepest level of the cause of suffering. So we can see this when we meditate. We can let go of the body, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, but then when the mind is very quiet, this sense of I is still there. And we have to turn our attention on that and try to even let go of that sense of I. But the ego in desire, it's important to see that relationship to it. Because as long as the mind is clinging to the other aggregates, then the sense of I appears to be real. But when we let go of the objects, and let go of desire and clinging, the sense of self starts to fade away, because it's not anything concrete there in the mind in the first place. It's just an aspect of thought. It's being created each moment of sensory impingement. Consciousness is arising and passing away, especially the ego consciousness, the sense of this consciousness that's experiencing objects outside. This is being regenerated at each moment of hearing, seeing, tasting, smelling, and touching. The ego consciousness is arising and then passing away. And the Buddha described consciousness, the ego consciousness, like when we sit here and we look around and we see this flowing picture of so many different things, that this is an illusion created in the mind. And the consciousness is similar to a motion picture reel of film. But the film is made up of individual frames with a little space in between. So you have a whole movie reel made up of hundreds and thousands of individual pictures, frames, with a space in between. But when you run it through a projector with light, then it appears as a smooth flowing event, or image and scene that then it appears to be real and we cling to it. So in the same way, consciousness is like that. Basically, when we look out and we see things, we're seeing an ongoing movie being created in the mind. And we don't see the arising and vanishing of these moments of hearing, seeing, tasting, smelling, and touching. We don't see them because our mind is very dull and the mind is very slow. So they're all run together. So the illusion of the solid world and the illusion of myself as being the experiencer, this is basically a very clever but deeply ingrained illusion in the mind. So in Vipassana meditation, this is actually the deepest level of Vipassana, seeing reality as it is. I mean, seeing consciousness as it is, in arising moment to moment through stimulation of the senses, and seeing how we're clinging to those objects and clinging to the sense of I that causes us to basically do everything in the life. The whole life is led for this sense of I. Of course, the I then develops greed, it develops aversion, and gets caught up in the whole web of karma. So, seeing this nature of the illusion of consciousness is you could say the deepest level of insight. First, you develop insight into the nature of impermanence, that the various sensory phenomena in the body, the material world is changing, and also that the perceptions and feelings and perceptions and mental formations are changing. But then in the deepest level, seeing how consciousness itself is just arising and vanishing. And there's three aspects to our experience. There's the knower, which is the I, the sense of self. And then there's the known, which is the object that we're experiencing. Like you hear a sound, that's the known, in the sense of I am hearing the sound, the knower, or the subject and the object. But in the middle, we don't see what's in the middle. In the middle is awareness. In the middle is the actual consciousness or awareness. But we don't see that because the mind jumps from the knower, it jumps right to the known with its attachment. And so we're so focused on the objects of our attachment that we don't see the space in between. We don't see the awareness. And so that's how the illusion of the I arises. So in Vipassana training, first we train ourselves to let go of the object. And when we're able to let go of the object, then the sense of self starts getting weaker, but it's still there. And then we have to turn our attention even to the sense of self and see how that arises. And you can directly see how the sense of self increases with the amount of our attachment or aversion. The sense of self appears to be real and strong. But in the practice of Vipassana, as you start to let go of the attachment and reactions to the various stimuli, then the mind's allowed to expand. And as the mind expands and is noticing more and more things kind of just arising and vanishing without attachment, the sense of self starts to fade away. So this is a direct realization, a direct observation of how the sense of I is made up of desire. So the more desires and aversions that you have, the stronger the sense of I is. And when you let go of those, the sense of I and self starts to get weaker and eventually disappear. But the problem that happens with a lot of meditators is that they can let go of all these other things, but as they start letting go of the external world and their sensations and perceptions and thoughts, fear arises in them. Because basically it's like the fear of death, especially the fear of ego death. So if you're clinging to the sense of I and think it's somehow real, then you'll never be able to let go of that and go into the deepest levels of meditation. So because in those deeper levels of meditation, it almost feels like death or ego death. And that's why people's minds are kind of jerked back to more activity, and they have to start doing things or thinking so that they don't lose their sense of self. But if you understand the nature of the ego and the self, and you don't have the fear of letting it go, and if you're able to gradually let it go, then you can experience a whole transition of consciousness, or consciousness transforms itself into a more expanded or universal type of experience when the sense of self is gone. And this is a very blissful experience. And this is actually liberation and freedom. Because the greatest prison is being imprisoned to the ego itself, being in the prison of I, me, and mine, and caught in all of the I, me, and mine, all of its habits, and so on. And so when you're able to finally let go of the last traces of that sense of I, the mind becomes liberated. And in the language of the Buddha, that's the deepest state of Meditação. But it's a gradual process. First we have to be liberated from the attachment to external things, be liberated from the attachment to sensations, be liberated from the clinging to perceptions, be free from liberated from the prison of the mental formations and the reactions, and then lastly being able to let go of that last vestige or trace of the I and experience true Meditação, or liberation and freedom from suffering. And that is how by overcoming the illusion of self, that's the deepest level one experiences the end of suffering, and one also experiences and directly realizes the Four Noble Truths.